It's Friday, my friends, and I'm back with the next in our series, Fanzine Friday. Today we're taking a look at another of these really rare UK fanzines, Black Rider number 2 from 1981. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look. This week, that's Black Rider number 2 from the UK. Gavin Denton is responsible for this, and this one I think came out in 1981. He really blew this one up. I think it's like 46, 47 pages long, so there's a lot to talk about. Hope you enjoy today's video. Okay, so today we're taking a look at Black Rider number 2. It's from the United Kingdom. Gavin Carver is the party principal responsible. We'll talk in a minute about he's got a team really of several people that seem to help him put this together. The cover again is done by Steve Lewis, and here's the fanzine. It's a heavy stock cover, folded in half and stapled, in the same size that we're used to with most of these digest-sized fanzines. And here we've got, I don't know, this guy looks to me like a court jester. And then we've got this guy who's barely got much on besides a loincloth out in the desert somewhere. Looks like he's getting ready to give him a good chopping. The editorial this time, he basically just talks about what he wanted to do when he started off with the fanzine, and he mentions that for him, in addition to the typical things like monsters and magic items and adventures, he thought it's important to have reviews so that people getting into the hobby would be able to decide for themselves whether to spend the money to buy a new game. And he gives you his logic, which is, look, this thing costs about 50 pence, but these games cost quite a bit, and so it's better to have fanzines, spend a little money on a fanzine and learn about the games than to buy a game and find out you don't like it. And so true to that concept, he does several reviews in this issue. So let's look at the contents. As you can see, it got a lot bigger. It's like 48 pages long. I think this time they do count the covers. So anyway, it's almost double, I think, in size. Not quite. He's got a DM's aid. He talks about a introductory scenario and some tips to make the game flow better. We'll talk about that in a minute. Gamble with Life, which is actually a Gamma World adventure. A guide to Elvish, which is a detailed explanation to how to write and read Elvish runes from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. A first review is of the board game from SPI called Gondor. He likes that one quite a bit. A View of a Thief, we'll come back to that one. He talks about thieves in the Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Disease of 1,000 Deaths, that is the Dungeons and Dragons adventure for this fanzine. Another review for Divine Right, and he doesn't like it particularly well. He says it's kind of a boring, tried and true war game, and not particularly any different than the ones you could have already purchased from several different publishers. Potluck, which are some random tables and charts for use in your D&D game. Codes, which is sort of like a little secret way to use codes and ruins as puzzles in your D&D campaign. Weapons, and weapons is a historical look at the type of armor and weapons that were used, particularly in England and nearby parts of Europe in the actual historical context. Model review, which are miniatures for use in fantasy gaming. We'll talk about those. Artifacts, which are new magic items. In this case, it's 4 related swords, and I'll tell you more about that when we get there. And then a review of the Superhero 2044 game, which he says is sort of good for lighthearted fun, but other than that, he didn't care for it particularly. And then he's got a little tiny review that's not listed in his table of contents for a new DragonQuest adventure called The Blades of Alectus, which he liked quite a bit. And he asks, after giving that one paragraph review, whether folks want to see more content from DragonQuest items or not. Contributors, it's the same team from last time. You've got Gavin Carver, who's the editor. Steve Lewis does the cover art, and then Richard Wickes and Sean Harris do the interior art. And then contributions from himself, Jonathan Dick, Craig Callaghan, Tim Lyons, and I think Richard also makes and Sean Harris both make some contributions as well. Okay. So here, I mentioned that there was the code, like the challenge, right? So here is the coded challenge that he's come up with in his article. I wanted to show it to you here. Have a look at that while I'm talking about the fanzine. It's a little puzzle for you to think about, or pause this video and see if you can figure out what this is. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you what the answer is and how to figure it out. Okay, so the DM's aid. He talks about he ran a campaign. He said it was actually a really good dungeon, but people didn't really enjoy it. And his analysis of that was that they were so wrapped up in the rules that everything they did, he's like, wait a minute, I got to find the rule for this, and he'd be flipping through the books. As he says that, I think in somewhat a charitable way. These rules are not necessarily the easiest. What's he say? No disrespect meant, the indexing system of the TSR books is not exactly crystal clear, which I thought was a pretty funny way of saying it. This article, by the way, is by Gavin, and so what he suggests you do instead, he said, one, you could have like essentially Dungeon Master screen, right? Get all the charts you need out ahead of time. Two, memorize the charts, which I think to some extent for the things we used a lot, several of us probably did back when we played a lot. And three, he says improvise. He says, look, just sort of figure out what seems fair, make it up. And here's the key point, I think, which is a good Dungeon Master's tip still today. The game is fun and people are excited to do something. You can't stop that action and energy while you take, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to figure out a rule, roll a bunch of stuff, and then say, okay, the thing you were going to do, which was going to take 5 seconds in real life, here's what happened. So you got to keep the pace of the game going because that builds the excitement in your players. I think that's an excellent point. Here's his suggestion, which I want to point out because I just think I see this a lot, right? So he's like, you want to make these things really streamlined, so I came up with a simple rule. And the simple rule is you take your character's stat that's most applicable to this, and that's your base. You figure out how hard it is, 1 to 6. This doesn't actually make a lot of sense to me, but you multiply, so 6 is the hardest, times the ability score. And he says that's going to give you, since 3 is the lowest, it's going to give anywhere from 3 to hard. If you have an 18, it's 108. You're going to get this range. That's your chance of success. Again, this doesn't necessarily make sense to me mathematically, but he's like, and then consider what other skills might help that. Like, can intelligence come into play? And maybe you get anywhere from a 0, plus 10 or 15%, or if you're low with those skills, negative modifier. And then what about your dexterity? Maybe that comes into play. And then you get another modifier. And then how hard is this? Are there extenuating circumstances? Another modifier. And then ultimately you roll your percentage dice chance and see if you make if you're successful or not. So again, I'm not sure how much faster that is, but at least you're not flipping through pages, I guess, is the idea. I think a lot of us do that in a much more simplified and streamlined form, right? Where you basically roll a d20 against a skill check, or maybe roll a d6 and just give people, something between a 1 to a 4, 5, and 6 chance of getting something to work. I also have some players who've shown me an idea where you take the number of d6 against a skill, and if it's 3d6 is sort of average. You roll 4d6 if it's hard, 2d6 if it's easy against a skill check too. Some people don't like skill checks, so I get that. And so the bottom line is, otherwise the DM just sort of makes it up, and that's an option too. Okay, back to this view of a thief. I don't know what goes on with the thieves in this guy's campaign. They apparently are kleptomaniacs, because he's talking once again about the fact that no one wants to be around a thief because they don't trust him, and he takes for granted the fact that, I guess, if you're a thief, you steal from everyone. And so again, talks about stealing from the party and how to get away with ideas on how a thief could get away with that without ending up dead or kicked out of the party. Everything from planting the stolen item on someone else to distract attention to yourself, to stealing things but then looking for hiding places where you can come back later and pick it up. And then he mentions, I guess some thieves maybe use their skills for the good of the party rather than stealing from their party members. That's every thief I've ever played with in a campaign. Frankly, because otherwise nobody wants to play with you, both in the game and at the table. So, but anyway, it's clearly an issue for him. All right, so here's the adventure this time around. This is called Disease of 1,000 Deaths. You can see here it's a lot of pages. This one I think would be good for a one-shot. And what I mean by that is either pre-rolled characters or characters you roll up just for this session. Do not bring your regular, this would not be good to bring your regular characters into this module. I say that because it has a high degree of failure and a high degree of death. So not the kind of thing I think you want to have make part of your regular campaign. It's puzzle-based. My own personal experience is the puzzle-based adventures are often way harder for players to figure out than the dungeon master thinks they will be. And so based on that experience, when I read this, I don't think the characters are figuring this out. The riddle that you get to help you figure it out is totally opaque. You're never going to figure it out from that riddle. Even when I read it, I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. And the consequence of getting to the right spot, but then failing to properly understand the riddle is you're going to die. All the characters are going to die. So that's pretty big bummer. In addition to which, there are a couple other ways you can get killed in here, including at one point there's a giant spider with 150 hit points. I'm not sure where he came up with that. That's pretty challenging. Here's your little map of the area, which also was a little confusing for me. Then you got a little town you go to, and there's a mystery about what's happened in the town. You got to figure that out. And then, so it starts with, you've got an NPC friend you made. He's gone off to look for some stuff. He doesn't come back on time, and you go out to find him. And you start off by going through this little town. People are all dead. It's not a big giveaway because that's where you start the adventure. You got to figure out what happened to the town. Then you got to figure out how to solve the problem for the town, and that's where you get the riddle. And so on. There's some new monsters here. They've got the man wolves, which they say are like lycanthropy, but they're halfway through the transformation. They just stopped in their permanent state like this. You've got some water trolls, which are interesting because they say these are the original trolls, but they don't regenerate and they're not as strong as the other trolls. But at least I guess they're smart and they're really good at chemistry. So for whatever reason, and so they're in here. And then this lady, this scantily clad lady, is a magic user, and she is the antagonist of this adventure, although I don't think you ever find her the way it's written up. Okay, potluck, random charts and tables. The first one is weapon breakage, and he's got this whole chart. He starts with how likely are particular types of weapons to break, and then we look at the attacker's weapon, the defender's weapon when they're in melee combat, and you get these rolls, and you roll. I mean, I just think people's weapons are going to be breaking all the time. And this does not, back to the idea of speeding up the action and making things flow, this seems horrible to me. The other one in there is rules for jousting, and it's got the level of your fighter, and there's a big chart, and you roll to see who jousts better. I mean, that kind of chart would be useful if in a particular setting or session you wanted to have jousting. I think that would be okay. In my years of playing, I don't think people have really ever done that. We just did it like normal combat, right? But here's an alternative way to do it. And if you wanted that, I think it's pretty well done. It goes through all the different things from, a miss to you stay on your horse, you're unseated, you're injured, you're hit in the head, that kind of thing. I should say about that session, if you play that campaign through, I think it's probably one session, but it can be two. And again, in my experience, players can get really bogged down in riddle-based challenges and can just, in this one, you could explore forever looking around for clues and stuff like that. So if it does take two sessions, your players are going to be out of their mind because they're going to be really frustrated. Okay, here's the explanation about weapons. They talk about the Saxons, the Danes, and the Normans, and what type of weapons they use and things like that. It's interesting reading, but not particularly helpful for an actual Dungeons & Dragons campaign for me. So the model review, and again, I think these are most interesting just to remind ourselves of what was going on at the time. So this one, he likes Citadel again, as do I, and the Fantasy Tribe Dwarf range had just come out, and he likes it a lot. Oh, they said the casting is a little uneven, meaning like some parts are good, some parts can look really bad. He likes it overall. I agree, the Citadel Dwarves are really well done, and as he says, really look and feel like they're very dwarvish, if that's a word. He also says that they came out with their new a weird fantasy range, which are unusual style of monsters, and he likes those. Although he says they're a little bit more, funny than they are serious. And then he just mentions at the end in passing that a bunch of things have just been released from Raoul Partha in their collector series, Goblin war riders with their wolves, other goblins, dwarves, and an elf commander have been released. So artifacts are, this time it's magical items, but this time he's got these 4 blades that were forged at the same time, and they're sort of related to each other. And this is done by Sean Harris. And so his idea are that, and these are very powerful blades, probably too powerful, to be honest with you. But very typical of the kind of thing you would see at the time, right? Like a little overpowered. So the first one here is Lawful Evil, and it's super intelligent, and it's going to try and take over your character if you're not lawful evil, and convert you to lawful evil, by the way. It casts spells as a 10th level magic user. It's got a whole bunch of spells, 4 first, 4 second, 3 third, 2 fourth, 2 fifth. I mean, how freaking powerful are you as a fighter? And we'll talk about how powerful the sword is in a minute, and you can cast a bunch of spells. This sword is called Mimgrod, and it has special. It's in the hands of an evil fighter. It has special bonuses based on who holds it and who you attack. So if you're an anti-paladin, +5, assassin +4, thief +3, fighter +2, any other evil character +1 on your hit and damage rolls. And then if you're attacking good creatures, you get a bonus as well on top of the original bonus. An elf is apparently the mortal enemy, so he's +3. Silver or gold dragons are +3. Kiren, the horse creature that's very good, +3. Halflings +2. Any other good character +1. And then if you do a hit, it's either base damage, and then there's a 5% chance you basically come under mental control of the attacker, or 5% chance instant death. So that's pretty extreme. And again, it's going to try and turn you into a lawful evil creature if you're not already. Good aligned people can't even hold the sword; they'll take damage. And if you hold the sword for more than 2 years, there's a chance it turns you into a pit fiend for a couple of days. So I don't know if that's supposed to be a nice thing to turn you into a pit fiend if you're lawful evil, or it's a penalty, but either way, it's pretty nasty. The next one is Elfenlord, the lawful good sword, and it can put out a soft light that chaotic and evil characters won't even be able to see, but allows you to have it illuminated. And then you use the command word. It's a really shiny light that affects evil creatures, and chaotic evil creatures less than 5 hit dice are forced to flee, and all others fight with a -3 on their attack or all their rolls. Constant detect evil spell, and the holder cannot be affected by any type of a fear spell, him and any of his allies, and otherwise it's +3 to hit and damage against evil, or regular just +1. Next we have the gold blade, Heru Laru, probably mispronouncing that. It's super heavy. It's 500 gold pounds in weight. It's solid gold, but magically enchanted so it doesn't bend. But it says it's so heavy it's -2 to hit, but anything it hits on a 17, 18, 19, or 20 turns to gold. No saving throw, and obviously, then you're just stuck, right? So if it's a living creature, you just essentially become a statue. It also can sense gold, and so if you concentrate and lay it down, it will turn and point towards the closest gold. If that's 2 gold pieces walking by in somebody's pocket, or a treasure chest down in a dungeon, wherever the closest gold is to you, it'll spin in that direction, which is perhaps somewhat helpful. And then if you get outnumbered and you're losing a battle, you can pray for assistance, and there's a small chance that the sword's mad at you. There's also a chance nothing happens, but then there's a 20% chance you either get 1 gold dragon or 2 gold dragons appear to fight with you. So that is again only sort of if you're in desperate conditions, but it's pretty powerful. And finally we have the Myriad Blade, whose name is Alberich, it is neutral. The golden blade's neutral, and so is this one. This blade, however, every time you go into combat, you roll, and it'll take on one of the attributes of 20% chance each to take on the attributes of one of those first 3 blades, and then a 40% chance it uses its own sort of skills. And then if you roll 100, your opponents just die. So there you go. In its natural form, not taking on the characteristics of the other ones, it's +5 to hit, and then you roll percentiles on the hit. It doesn't want to do damage, so it can charm somebody, blind somebody, give them a little bit of damage, or basically affect their muscles so that they're not able to fight very well, or cause the enemy to flee. And that's sort of the personality of this blade, is it's trying to avoid killing. And if you do some killing, it can become very upset with you. Now, if you're neutral and you have this blade for a long period of time, you can eventually gain mental control of the owners of the other 3 blades. I don't know, you have to try, the whole quest to try and find those other people, and I don't know, they become your hirelings with these superpowered blades or whatever. But anyway, again, they're probably too powerful, but some pieces of this I think would be fun to utilize in a campaign. I really like the things that give you some not the same effect every time, right? So this is sort of like you're not 100, it's a good weapon, but you're not 100% sure what's going to happen in the combat. I think that introduces, especially something that's really powerful, some appropriate balance. Okay, so this is an advertisement, but I've seen it a couple of different fanzines, and I just like it. The art's pretty funny. You've got like this Djinn or genie here who has chopped this guy up, and on his shield, his name is there, Fred. And it says this is for a game company, a bookstore, a game store. And Games Unlimited War Games Catalog. It's the best thing since Sliced Fred. And if you can see the details, his arms laying there, his head's laying there, his legs chopped off. So it's pretty gruesome, but apparently, some nice humor in their view of that. Here's the last page, and I have it here because of the artwork of this little sort of cobra with snaky arms holding a weapon and some wings, just kind of funky art. And also, he said in the last issue that he asked people to say, like, what are your favorite games you're playing now? And it's interesting, and he says this, D&D is not at the top, so maybe D&D is sort of out of favor. And that happened, right? D&D was a huge thing, and then people wanted to play other games. Obviously, I think nowadays that's come back around a little bit. But anyway, his list from his readers: Dune, Gamma World, Cosmic Encounter, D&D, and Doctor Who. And he mentions in the beginning that he's been playing Dune lately, and he really likes it. And then there's this little note at the bottom that says, and if you remember my video, he said, next time, remember I said we're going to talk about conning? Well, you were conned. So I guess that's either a joke or they just decided not to write that article. Okay, so here is, at the end, as promised, the code, right? Remember, and he shows you here his little thing. So here's the answer. The answer to the riddle or the coded word is fire. And you can see, you take the word, and he says you cut it in half, right in the middle, and then you slide it one letter, the tops, one letter to the right, and then you grab the one that's at the very end by itself, and you bring that all the way around to the beginning. And so there at the bottom, you can see how when you take the top half of fire and you slide it over, take the top half of the first F, the E from the end, and bring it around to the top, you end up with this symbol here at the bottom. Okay, so that's it for Fanzine Friday today. Black Rider #2 from 1981. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you're enjoying the series. Hope you are subscribed, and hope you'll tell your friends to take a look at the channel, and hopefully they can become subscribers as well. We're trying to put out content once or twice a week just to celebrate some of the awesome stuff that we all enjoyed. And in cases like this, some things that I've discovered recently that I really love, that I think everybody else who has similar taste and enjoyment of the original D&D will enjoy taking a look at with me. Until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.